I used to hum to stop myself from crying. I didn't even know I was doing it, just to block out the yelling, the hitting, everything. This is the real story of Chris Brown's 20-year struggle between amazing talent and the pain that followed him everywhere. In this story, you'll hear how a broken gas station demo almost changed everything. You'll learn the hidden meaning behind his most famous dance move, and you'll discover what happened at the Grammys that made him think about quitting forever. But could he survive the pain that came long before the world ever knew his name? Before the music, before the fame, before the world said his name, there was a boy who sang to himself to stay calm. Tappahannock, Virginia, a small town where everyone knew each other. Chris Brown was 6 years old when his life began to change. That was the year his parents got divorced. His mother, Joyce, tried her best to keep going. Then she met Donnell. He became part of their lives, but instead of bringing peace, he brought fear. Some nights, Chris would curl up on the floor behind his bed. He pressed a pillow over his ears while shouting and fighting filled the house. He heard doors slam, heard his mom cry, heard things break. He didn't know what to do, so he hummed, quietly, just simple sounds, like a soft song with no words. It helped him feel safe. It was the only thing he could do. Church became a place where things felt calm. On Sundays, he sat next to his mom in his best clothes. His shoes were shiny and his shirt felt stiff, but his voice was gentle. He sang along with the music. It was one of the first places where he felt seen in a good way. People smiled at him. That meant something. It made him feel like he mattered. But during the week, things went back to how they were. He kept hiding. He stayed quiet. He learned how to become small so he wouldn't get in trouble. One night, everything changed. Donnell hurt his mom so badly that her nose bled. Chris stood there, frozen. He didn't run away. He didn't cry. He looked around and saw a baseball bat leaning in the closet. For a second, he thought about using it, not because he wanted to, but because he wanted the hurting to stop. He didn't. He went back to his room and picked up a pencil instead. He started to draw. Over and over, he drew pictures of Michael Jackson that helped him feel like he had control. Music stayed with him. It never left. His mom noticed how he moved when a song came on. He copied Usher's dance moves from the TV. His body remembered things that his mind wanted to forget. She bought him blank CDs, and he filled them with his own songs. They were rough, his voice cracked, but they were his. One day, while he was at the gas station where his dad worked, a man pulled up in a car. He had fancy clothes and wore a chain. Chris handed him one of those CDs. He didn't say much, just gave it to him and hoped he would listen. That was the beginning. But even as music showed him a way forward, the fear didn't leave. At school, he still walked quietly down the halls. He still had days when he felt like hiding. At night, he still cried when things got too quiet. But just before he turned 12, something special happened. A summer camp talent show. Chris chose to sing a song that surprised everyone's thong song. People laughed at first, but then they clapped loudly. Something changed inside him. When he went home, he told his mom, "I think I want to sing forever." She didn't laugh. She looked at him and said, "Then you need to practice." And so he did. He practiced when the house was dark, when the only sounds were his breath and the beat in his head. He practiced because it made him feel alive. Music became his way of speaking when he didn't have the words. Dancing, too. He'd watch himself in the mirror and copy every move he could remember. There was no one watching, no one clapping. But in that small room with cracked floor tiles and peeling paint, he felt like he was on stage. There was a photo taped to the side of the mirror. It showed Chris and his mom. Both were smiling. In that photo, they looked safe, happy. He kept it there, even when things got worse. That photo meant something to him. Later in life, that same photo would come back in a way he didn't expect. It would bring up old feelings. In part 6, you'll learn why that photo almost broke him. But for now, remember this. Even when someone looks like they have it all, they may still be carrying pain from a long time ago. Chris Brown's journey didn't begin on stage. It started in a hallway filled with yelling, where a scared boy hummed to keep from crying. There's a gas station on a quiet road in Tappahannock, Virginia. It isn't famous. There's no sign that says history happened here. But one summer afternoon, something did happen. Something small, something easy to miss. A boy, only 13 years old, handed a CD to a stranger. And that moment changed everything. Chris Brown was that boy. He didn't have a recording studio. He didn't have a team or a manager. What he had was a voice. a few songs burned onto a homemade disc, and a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would listen. His father worked at that gas station. It was a place with old pumps, worn-down signs, and concrete that always smelled like oil. Chris sometimes hung out there after school or on weekends, helping wipe windows or stacking snack shelves. But mostly, he danced behind the station where nobody could see him. The back lot became his stage. The sun bounced off car hoods, music played from his little CD player. And in that empty space, Chris practiced like it was Madison Square Garden. He didn't care that his sneakers slipped on the pavement. He didn't care when drivers looked at him like he was strange. He just danced, because dancing made him feel real, and music made him feel safe. His mom had given him that CD burner for Christmas. It wasn't expensive, but it meant the world. He used it every chance he got. He recorded himself singing, sometimes with just a beat in the background, sometimes a cappella. He wasn't trying to sound perfect. He was trying to tell the truth. At night, he'd sit at the kitchen table with headphones on, clicking through songs, checking for small mistakes. His mom would bring him juice or pat his shoulder. She didn't always understand the technology, but she understood what it meant to him. One day, after weeks of saving, Chris printed a few CD covers with his name and a fake artist photo he took on an old phone. He even came up with the name C Sizzle. It made him laugh, but it also gave him courage. It helped him feel like someone real, someone with a future. Then came the day that would change his life. It was hot outside, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin and makes the air feel heavy. Chris was behind the gas station again, practicing a new routine. He didn't know someone was watching, not at first. A car had pulled in. It was nothing special, just a dark sedan with tinted windows. A man stepped out, filled up the tank, and noticed the boy dancing near the wall. He didn't say anything, just watched for a while. Chris noticed him too, but didn't stop. Something inside him said, "Keep going," so he danced harder, hit every beat like it was the last one. Finally, the man walked over and asked, "You got anything I can hear?" Chris froze for a second. His heart started racing. Then he reached into his backpack, pulled out one of the homemade CDs, and handed it over. "I made this," he said quietly. "It's not perfect, but it's mine." The man took it, nodded, and drove away. That was it. No promises, no business card. Just a simple moment to CD exchanged between two strangers. But that man worked for a small production group, and that CD didn't end up in the trash. It ended up on a desk, then in a player, then in a phone call that led to another, and another. Within a few weeks, Chris got a call. Someone wanted to meet. They liked his sound. They liked his confidence. They wanted to hear more. It was the first time someone from the music world took him seriously. The first time someone outside his family said, "You might be ready." It wasn't a contract. Not yet. But it was enough to light a fire in his heart. From that day on, Chris practiced even harder. He wrote new songs, he re-recorded vocals, he started working with a coach to improve his breathing and control. It was hard, it was scary, but it was real. Joyce, his mom, drove him to every meeting, every practice. Sometimes they sat in waiting rooms for hours. Sometimes they ate fast food in the car, but she never complained. She believed in him more than he believed in himself. One night, Chris turned to her and asked, "What if it doesn't happen? What if no one ever signs me?" Joyce didn't answer right away. She just looked at him and said, "It's already happening. You're doing it. Whether the world sees it yet or not, you're already becoming." That stuck with him. Because in a world full of maybes that felt like truth, more meetings came, more practice. Chris was only 13, but he was already learning the hard side of the industry. Some people smiled and nodded, then never called again. Others gave false hope, but he kept going. Then came the day someone said yes. A woman named Tina Davis heard his demo. She wasn't just anyone. She was an executive, someone who had worked with major artists. She saw something in Chris, not just a good voice, not just sharp dance moves. She saw a spark, a story, a fire. She set up an audition with a big name in the business, L.A. Reid. Chris was nervous, but he went. He sang, he danced, he gave everything he had. And L.A. Reid was impressed. He offered Chris a deal with Def Jam Records. It should have been the happiest moment of his life, but Chris didn't sign. Not because he wasn't grateful, not because he didn't want it, but because another label, Jive Records, had a better plan. They had helped young artists like Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake, and Chris needed a team that understood how to grow with someone his age. So he went with Jive. It was a big decision for a kid, but Chris was starting to think like an artist, like someone with a future. And through it all, he never forgot the gas station. He never forgot the sound of sneakers sliding on concrete, the smell of oil in the air, the way the sky looked when that stranger asked, "You got anything I can hear?" Because that was the moment he stopped waiting to be discovered. Dan started preparing to be seen. Now, the stage was getting closer. The lights were growing brighter. He wasn't just C. Sizzle anymore. He was Chris Brown, and the world was about to hear his name. But with every step toward success came a shadow, a whisper of doubt, a quiet fear. Would he be enough? Would the world love him once they saw the whole truth? That answer wouldn't come easily, not for years. But for now, he had a shot, and he wasn't going to waste it. Before the cameras, before the bright lights, before the screaming fans there, was a nervous 11-year-old boy standing in front of folding chairs at a summer camp. The room smelled like juice boxes and pencil erasers. It wasn't a big show. It wasn't even a real stage, just a school cafeteria turned into a talent show for kids who needed something to look forward to. But to Chris Brown, it felt like the biggest moment of his life. He had signed up without telling anyone, not his mom, not his friends. He didn't even know if he would go through with it. The idea scared him, but the need to be heard that was louder than fear. He waited backstage while other kids performed. Some sang softly, barely louder than a whisper. Some danced off-beat. Others forgot their lines or ran off halfway. The crowd was kind, but distracted. Kids laughed, counselors clapped politely. It was a noisy room full of short attention spans. Then, his name was called. Next up, we have Chris Brown. He stood up slowly. His legs felt like rubber. His stomach twisted. His shirt stuck to his back from sweat. He didn't want to move, but he did. Because something inside him told him this mattered. He walked up to the front. A single microphone stood in the center. The floor was sticky from spilled soda. The sound system cracked as the music began to play. He chose Thong Song by not because it was funny, not because it was popular, but because it had rhythm, energy, fire. It made him move. And when Chris moved, he felt like someone else, someone free. The music started. The crowd giggled. A few kids whispered. But Chris didn't stop. He started to dance. He hit the beat. His arms moved with precision. His feet slid across the floor like he was floating. He wasn't thinking, he was feeling, letting his body speak the words he didn't know how to say out loud. Then he started to sing. At first, his voice shook. His pitch was off. But then it found the note. His nerves began to melt. His shoulders relaxed. His breath slowed. And for the first time in his life, the noise in his head went quiet. Halfway through the song, the giggles stopped. The room was still. Then came the clapping, then cheering, then laughter again, but not mocking laughter. It was joy, surprise, delight, the kind that fills a room with light. When he finished, Chris stood frozen. He didn't know what to do. He had never been applauded like that before. Not at home, not at school, not anywhere. He looked up and saw his mom standing in the back. Joyce Hawkins didn't scream or cry. She just smiled, slowly, like she had seen a future open up in front of her. That night, everything changed. They didn't go out to celebrate. They didn't post a video. But in the car on the way home, his mother reached over and touched his hand. "I saw you," she said softly. Chris turned away to hide his smile. He didn't sleep much that night, not because he was nervous anymore, but because he was excited. For the first time, he didn't just imagine being a performer. He had tasted it. He had lived it. The applause kept replaying in his head. It wasn't just a sound. It was the feeling of being seen, the feeling of being enough. He didn't want that feeling to disappear, so he made a promise to himself. "I'm going to keep doing this, no matter what." The next day, he asked his mom if she could help him find more songs to practice. They went to a music store and bought a few CDs. Usher, Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder. He played them on repeat, studied their every move, every note, every pause. He started practicing in front of mirrors in the hallway. On the porch, he didn't care who was watching, because now he had a memory to hold on to, a moment of courage that would become the root of everything that followed. Soon, he started performing at more local events, school assemblies, church functions, community fairs. Each time he got a little better, a little stronger. The nerves didn't go away, but he learned how to walk through them. One day, at a neighborhood barbecue, a man with a camcorder asked him to perform. Chris agreed. He danced on the grass, singing with no microphone, using a folding chair as a prop. Someone uploaded it to a local message board. More people started to notice, but it wasn't just his moves, it was his energy, the way he lit up when the music came on, like the world fell away and only the rhythm remained. At school, things stayed the same. He was still that quiet boy in the back of the class. He still got teased for being too into music, but Chris didn't mind anymore, because every time he closed his eyes, he could hear that summer camp crowd. He could feel the stage under his shoes. That sticky floor had become sacred. That small moment had become a spark. And the spark was growing. He started making mixed CDs of his own vocals. He recorded over karaoke tracks. He borrowed a friend's mic and stayed up late trying to layer harmonies using only a basic laptop program. His mom made sure he got to school on time, but she never told him to stop chasing music. She knew what it meant to him. Joyce watched her son change before her eyes. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was becoming an artist. And deep down, she knew this wasn't just a phase. This was the beginning of a journey that neither of them could have predicted. A few months later, she heard him humming a new melody in the living room, something he had written himself. When she asked what it was, he smiled and said, "Just a song I'm working on." It didn't sound like anything on the radio. It sounded like him. That night, she called her sister and said, "I think he's going to make it." But Chris still had doubts. He still had moments when the fear crept in. When he asked himself, what if I'm not good enough? What if that talent show was the best I'll ever do? And each time those thoughts came, he went back to that moment, that cafeteria stage, that sweaty shirt, that shaky voice, that applause, that feeling. He didn't know when or how, but he knew he had to keep going. He didn't want to chase fame. He wanted to chase that feeling. Because when he sang, when he danced, when he gave everything he had to the music, he felt alive. And in a world that had taught him to stay quiet, that mattered more than anything. But soon, the mirror wouldn't be enough. Soon, the small stages would feel too small. Soon, he would find himself standing alone in a city far from home, staring at his own reflection and wondering if talent was enough, if heart was enough, if the world was ready to see him, not just as a kid from Virginia, but as someone who didn't fit in a box. And in that moment, he'd have to decide. Was he willing to be alone in order to be true? The hotel room was cold, the kind of cold that settles into your skin, even when the heater hums softly in the background. Chris Brown sat on the edge of a twin bed, looking into a mirror that hung above the dresser. He was only 15, but his eyes looked older that day, tired, searching. The mirror didn't lie. It showed him what he didn't want to say out loud. He felt alone. He had just moved to New York City, a new place, a bigger world, but everything inside him felt small. The streets were loud, the buildings were tall. Everyone seemed busy, fast, important, and Chrissy was just a boy with a suitcase, a few demo tracks, and a dream that now felt too big to carry by himself. Back home in Virginia, he had his mom, his routines, his safe spaces. Here, everything felt different. He didn't know where anything was. He didn't know who to trust. The people in the music business said he had something, but no one told him what that meant or what to do next. It was exciting, but also scary. Every day, he went to a studio in Harlem, a small place with gray walls and cables running across the floor. He would rehearse for hours, singing the same chorus again and again, dancing until his legs felt like jelly. Sometimes his voice cracked. Sometimes he got the moves wrong, but he didn't stop, because deep inside, he still remembered that camp talent show, that moment when people clapped just for him. He held on to that feeling like it was the only thing keeping him warm. He wasn't famous yet. He wasn't rich. He didn't have backup dancers or a stylist. Most days, he wore the same sneakers and a hoodie that still smelled like home. But in that studio, he gave everything he had, because this was his shot. Still, the pressure was real. Music executives came in with notes and ideas. Some said he needed to sound more urban. Others said he needed to appeal to pop fans. One day, someone told him, "You're too R&B for pop, too pop for R&B." That sentence echoed in his head for weeks. What did that even mean? Wasn't he just being himself? At night, Chris stared at the ceiling in his hotel room. The lights from the city blinked through the curtains. He thought about going home, thought about calling his mom and saying, "I can't do this." But he didn't. Instead, he looked in the mirror again, and every night he asked the same question. Do I belong? He tried to answer it with his work. He wrote lyrics in a notebook he kept under his pillow. He practiced choreography in the hallways when no one was watching. He listened to Michael Jackson and tried to feel what made those songs special. He didn't just want to copy greatness, he wanted to understand it. He began to co-write songs for his first album. Most kids his age were doing homework. Chris was in meetings taking notes on bridges and hooks. He cared deeply about the music, not just the sound, but the feeling. He wanted people to feel seen when they heard his voice, just like he once did. His producer, Scott Storch, liked his focus. So did Mark Pitts, who had worked with big names before. They said Chris had range, stage presence, star quality. But Chris didn't see any of that when he looked in the mirror. All he saw was a teenager trying to stay brave. The hardest part wasn't the work. It was the silence. After long recording days, he would come back to the hotel, take off his shoes, and sit alone. No family dinners, no school bell, no laughing with friends, just quiet. And sometimes that quiet felt heavier than any beat. One night, after recording late into the evening, Chris walked to Times Square. It was past midnight. Neon signs flashed across his face. He watched strangers taking selfies, laughing, rushing past. No one knew who he was. And for a moment, he liked it that way. It gave him space to breathe. He sat on a bench and thought about everything. His childhood, his mom. That moment when he gave a CD to a stranger at a gas station. It all felt like it had happened to someone else. And then he whispered to himself, I'm really here. Not as a fan, not as a kid dreaming from a small town, but as an artist, trying, working, becoming. Back at the studio the next day, he recorded a track called Run It. He gave it everything, his energy, his edge, his rhythm. The producers nodded. They could feel it. The song was sharp, catchy, full of confidence. But Chris didn't smile yet. He wanted to hear how the world would respond. When Run It finally released, it didn't just land, it exploded. It shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Chris was the first male artist since Montel Jordan in 1995 to debut at the top with his very first single, He Should Have Been Over the Moon. And yet, that night, he didn't go to a party. He didn't buy new clothes or post a video. He sat in a car by himself, playing the song again and again on the radio. The voice sounded like him, but also didn't. He was proud, but he was also scared. He wondered, what happens now? Will they expect me to be perfect forever? That question would follow him for years. But in that moment, something else happened too. He closed his eyes and whispered, thank you. Not to a person, not to the music, but to himself. To the boy who didn't give up, to the kid who danced in gas station parking lots, to the shy 11-year-old who shook on stage and still sang through it, to the teen who stared into hotel mirrors and kept believing, even when he wasn't sure. The next morning, he woke up to more phone calls, more interviews, more bookings. His team handed him schedules and press kits. His debut album was coming soon. Things were moving fast now. He was no longer just trying. He was now expected to deliver, to entertain, to win. And deep down, he knew something was changing. Fame wasn't a dream anymore. It was becoming real. And real things carry weight. The mirror in his hotel room was still there. He looked into it one more time before packing his bag. His reflection stared back, older, sharper, tired, but ready. He whispered one more question. Are you ready? Then he turned off the lights and walked into the world. The first time Chris stepped into a professional recording booth, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. His heart pounded in his chest. His palms were sweating. His fingers trembled as he adjusted the headphones. This wasn't a home mic. This wasn't a demo CD made in a bedroom. This was real. The walls around him were padded. The light above the glass window glowed red. A producer sat outside the booth, waiting. The song was loaded. The beat was ready. All Chris had to do was sing. But something strange was happening inside him. He wasn't nervous about the notes. He knew the lyrics. He had practiced every part. But as he stood in front of that microphone, something deeper stirred. A feeling, a pressure, like everything he had ever hoped for, was now sitting in his throat, waiting to be let out, but afraid to be heard. This was Run It, the song that would later go on to top the charts. The song that would introduce Chris Brown to the world. But on that day, it wasn't a hit yet. It was just a beat, a blank space, a quiet test, and Chris didn't know if he would pass. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and sang the first line. His voice cracked. Not badly, just enough for him to hear it. Just enough for doubt to sneak in. He paused, adjusted the headphones again, looked through the glass. The producer nodded calmly. Pressed the button on the board. Let's run it again. So they did. Second take, third, fourth. Chris started to loosen up. He moved his shoulders with the rhythm. He leaned into the mic with more confidence. By the seventh take, the sound changed. The studio filled with something sharp, clean, young, but bold. Something that had rhythm and hunger. That was it. The producer leaned back in his chair, smiled. Chris stepped out of the booth. He could barely breathe. The song wasn't finished yet, but the energy in the room had shifted. Everyone felt it. They knew something had just started. Back at the hotel, Chris flopped onto his bed, exhausted. He didn't want to eat, didn't want to check his phone. He just lay there, letting the day settle in. He replayed the recording in his head. He remembered the crack in his voice, the warmth of the mic, the way it felt to finally let go. This wasn't like the talent shows or the home demos. This was another level. This was a version of himself he had never met before. A version that was strong, focused, a little scared, but standing tall anyway. In the days that followed, he recorded more songs. Yo Gimme That Poppin'. He spent long hours in the booth. No breaks, no distractions, just the beat, the lyrics, and the work. Some nights, he stayed so late that he fell asleep on the studio couch. Other nights, he called his mom just to hear her voice. "Are you okay?" she'd ask. "I'm tired," he'd whisper, "but I'm good," and he meant it. Because even though his body ached and his mind raced with every correction and note, he knew he was building something, not just a record, but a life. The album was coming together, slowly but powerfully. Then came the meetings. People from the label gathered in rooms with big windows and whiteboards. They talked about release dates, music videos, choreography, tour prep, and always at the center of the conversation was Chris. He listened quietly, took notes, asked questions when he didn't understand something. He wanted to be part of every step, not just the voice on the track, but the mind behind the sound. Some people called him a natural. Others said he was the next Usher, but Chris wasn't trying to be anyone else. He wanted to be himself, even if he didn't fully know who that was yet. His debut album was titled Chris Brown. Just his name, simple, honest. No need for symbols or big statements, just the truth. The photo shoot for the album cover took place in Los Angeles. Chris stood in front of bright lights, wearing a leather jacket and sneakers. He looked serious in the pictures, but inside he was laughing. Not because he thought it was funny, but because he couldn't believe this was real. Just a year ago, he was handing CDs out behind a gas station. Now he was preparing to release a major label album. His face would be on posters, his songs would be on the radio. And that scared him. Not because he didn't want it, but because it meant people would finally see him. And once the world sees you, they don't forget. You either become a star or a memory. He didn't want to be forgotten. When the album dropped in November 2005, Chris was 16 years old. The day it came out, he walked into a record store and saw stacks of his own CD on the shelf. He didn't know what to do. He just stared at it for a long time. Then he bought one, just to feel it in his hands. He took it home, peeled off the plastic, opened the case. Inside, he found the little booklet with the lyrics, the thank you notes, the glossy photos. He held it like it was something sacred, like it was proof, not to the world, to himself. He had made it, not to the top, but through the door. And now came the part no one could prepare him for being seen everywhere. The first time he heard Run It on the radio, he was in a car with his team. The beat dropped, and someone turned the volume up. Chris froze. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just listened. He knew every word, every breath, every moment. But hearing it out, there in the wild, on the airwaves, for the world, it felt different. It felt huge. He smiled, then laughed. Then leaned back in his seat and whispered, "Wow." The song climbed the charts fast. It reached #1 and stayed there. TV interviews followed, music video shoots, tours, rehearsals. He started performing live. Stage lights blinded him, crowds screamed, cameras flashed. He danced hard, sang with everything he had. After each show, he was soaked in sweat and running on adrenaline. But alone in hotel rooms, when it all went quiet, the same thought returned. Do they really see me? Not the image, not the smile, not the moves. Him, the boy from Tappahannock, the one who used to hum songs to drown out yelling in the hallway. the one who whispered lyrics under blankets just to fall asleep. Fame was loud now, loud enough to shake the floor. But inside, Chris still carried silence, a silence that kept asking questions. And soon, that silence would grow heavier. Because with success comes pressure. With pressure comes weight. And with weights, sometimes comes a crack. The night was supposed to be a celebration. Chris Brown had been nominated for a Grammy. His album was doing well. His songs were topping charts. His face was on magazines. His videos were on TV. The world knew his name now. But that night, he wasn't on the red carpet. He was sitting in a quiet hotel room. The TV in front of him was showing the award show. Bright lights, famous faces, loud music, glittering dresses, polished suits. But in his room, everything felt cold. The air was still, the lights were off, just the screen glowing in the dark. He sat at the edge of the bed, his hands pressed together. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't celebrating. He was thinking about what had happened just days before. A moment that changed everything. It started with a fight. Not the kind that ends quickly, not the kind that gets forgotten. This one would follow him for the rest of his life. In February 2009, Chris and his girlfriend at the time, Rihanna, had an argument. It didn't stay private. It didn't stay small. That night ended in something painful, something violent, and the world would soon know every detail. Photos would leak. Headlines would spread. People would choose sides. Some would walk away. Others would stay silent. But that night, right there in that hotel room, before the headlines, before the court dates, there was just Chris and the silence. He stared at the TV screen as the camera moved across the crowd. Then it happened. They announced his name, his category. He had been nominated. He could have been sitting in the crowd. He could have smiled, clapped, maybe even stood on stage. But his seat was empty. And in that moment, it didn't feel like a missed opportunity. It felt like a punishment, like the world was turning its back, like the air in the room had disappeared. He folded into himself. He didn't cry right away. He just sat there, still quiet, as if moving would make it worse. But the tears came later. Not the loud kind, not angry, just slow, tired ones. He had made a mistake, a serious one, and the world was watching. Before this moment, his life had moved fast. Too fast, maybe. From gas stations to studios, from home demos to sold-out tours, from nobody to everybody. And now, everything was stopping. Radio stations stopped playing his songs. Brands ended their deals. Friends stopped calling. He felt like he was falling, but he didn't know where the ground was. He told his mom everything. He told his team. He told the police. He didn't try to hide it. He took responsibility. He turned himself in. But that didn't make it easier, because no matter what he said, no matter how many times he apologized, the world didn't forget. Some people wanted him gone, others wanted him punished, and some just wanted answers. But Chris didn't have the right words. He tried. In interviews, in statements, in quiet talks behind closed doors. He said he was sorry. He said he felt regret every single day, and he meant it. He didn't want to excuse what he had done. He just wanted people to know he was still human. Still learning, still hurting. But when the camera zoomed in on his empty seat at the Grammys, it told a different story. It told the story of absence, of loss, of shame. He didn't touch the remote. He let the show play on, but the sound didn't reach him. His thoughts were louder. What have I done? What happens now? Can I ever come back from this? Those questions circled around him like shadows. The next few weeks were heavy. He was charged. He went to court. He stood in front of a judge and entered a plea. He accepted the punishment. 5 years probation, community service, domestic violence counseling. He didn't argue. He didn't run. He just nodded and took it, because deep down, he knew he needed to learn. He needed to change. Not just for the cameras, but for himself. There were days when he couldn't get out of bed. There were nights when he turned off his phone, afraid of what new headline would appear. But slowly, he started moving again. He went to therapy. He joined counseling groups. He showed up for the court-ordered classes, and in those rooms, sitting beside strangers, he learned things he had never heard before. About emotions, about control, about wounds that don't heal unless you look at them directly. He remembered his childhood, the fights in the hallway, the fear in his mother's eyes, the way he had promised himself again and again that he would never be like the man who hurt her. And now, here he was. Facing that truth, it hurt. It broke him. But it also opened something inside him, a space to change, a space to grow. He began journaling, not for the public, just for himself. Pages filled with thoughts, mistakes, hopes, prayers. He didn't want to hide from the past, he wanted to understand it, to make peace with it. The music didn't come back right away. The fans didn't either. He had to earn it, one day at a time, one song at a time. He started writing again, not for charts, not for labels, for healing, for honesty. He wrote songs about pain, about guilt, about the pressure of being young and famous and flawed. He didn't try to sound perfect, he just wanted to sound true. And slowly, people started listening again. Not everyone, not all at once, but some. Enough to remind him that growth doesn't happen in a spotlight. It happens in the dark, where you sit alone, where you ask hard questions, where you cry into pillows and talk to mirrors. The empty seat at the Grammys stayed with him. Not as a loss, but as a lesson. That fame doesn't protect you. That success doesn't fix you. That being loved by the world means nothing if you don't love who you're becoming. Chris never forgot that night. He didn't try to erase it. He carried it forward into his next album, into his next decisions, into the long road of rebuilding what had been broken. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more struggles ahead, more headlines, more tests. But now, he wasn't pretending to be perfect. He was trying to be real, trying to be better, trying to be whole. It was supposed to be a normal morning. Chris Brown had arrived at the studio early. He was booked for a live interview on Good Morning America. The producers had welcomed him. Makeup had been done, and the chair across from the host was waiting, empty, quiet, expecting him. The lights in the room were soft but bright. The cameras were already warming up. The crew moved calmly, everyone doing their part. Chris sat in a back room, alone for a moment. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking again, not because of nerves, because of everything that had been building inside. This was 2011. The world was still watching him through the lens of 2009, still holding on to the past, still unsure of what to believe. He had apologized. He had gone to counseling. He had tried to rebuild. But trust is slower than sound. It doesn't move with the beat of a new song. It takes time. And that morning, it hadn't come yet. When he walked onto the set, the chair across from Robin Roberts looked simple. Just a seat, just another interview. But that chair would become a symbol of pressure, of misunderstanding, of a crack in the surface. They started talking. Cameras rolling, lights steady, the world watching from home. Robin asked questions about his music, his tours, his album FAME. Chris answered carefully, smiled when he needed to, spoke in a calm voice. But then the topic changed. Robin asked about the 2009 incident. It was part of her job. She wasn't being harsh, just doing what many interviewers had done before. Asking about the moment people still wanted answers for, but Chris wasn't ready. Not that day. He felt it rising, that heat in the chest, that thumping in the neck, that tightness in the back of the throat. His breath shortened. His answers became sharp. He didn't yell. He didn't break. Not yet. But inside, something was moving. Something he had tried to control for too long. He finished the segment. The cameras cut. The interview ended. But the storm had already started. Backstage, something snapped. There are different stories about what happened next, different versions, but this much is clear. Chris lost control. He picked up a chair and threw it. A window shattered. The glass fell, tiny pieces raining down like ice. People heard shouting, saw confusion, felt fear. Chris rushed out, his shirt half open, his fists clenched. He didn't hurt anyone, but the damage had already been done. Not to the studio, to his own reflection. He saw the faces around him, surprised, disappointed, afraid. And once again, the headlines began. Chris Brown throws chair. Chris Brown smashes window at GMA, another meltdown. But few people asked what led up to that moment, what was happening inside him, what was shaking under the surface. Chris didn't try to defend it. He didn't say the questions were unfair. He didn't blame Robin. In fact, he tweeted thanks to GMA afterward, saying he was sorry for what happened and appreciated the opportunity, but the damage had been done, and the pain behind it was still there. Later, he sat in another room, smaller, quieter. He looked at his hands again, still shaking, and this time, tears filled his eyes, not from anger, from sadness, from being tired. Tired of trying to prove he had changed. Tired of being seen as a villain? Tired of carrying guilt like a second skin? He wasn't asking to be excused. He was asking to be understood. But understanding can be hard to find when the spotlight is so bright it blinds. People around him started asking questions. His team suggested rehab. Not for drugs, not for alcohol, but for anger, for pain, for the invisible wounds that never quite healed. Chris agreed. He went. He checked into a facility that focused on emotional regulation and trauma recovery. It was quiet there. No fans, no cameras, no fame, just long talks. Group circles, honest conversations. He started to open up. About his childhood, the hallway fights, the fear of losing his mother, the helplessness he felt as a child when he couldn't protect her. He talked about the promise he made to himself to never become that kind of man, and how in one moment he had. He cried when he said it, not because he wanted sympathy, but because it still haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it. Not just the night of the incident, but the mirror afterward, the moment he saw himself and didn't recognize the person staring back. Rehab wasn't easy. Some days he wanted to leave. Some days he didn't want to talk, but he stayed. Because for once, he wasn't performing. He was healing, he was listening. He was learning that anger isn't just noise, it's pain, it's memory. It's a story that hasn't been told the right way. And sometimes, that story needs space to breathe. During those weeks, Chris began journaling again. He drew, he painted, he listened to others share their own struggles. And slowly, something inside him softened. He remembered who he was before the fame, before the cameras, before the mistakes. He was a boy who loved to dance, a boy who used music as medicine, a boy who once found joy in a summer camp talent show. That boy was still there, just buried, under hurt, under headlines, under expectations. He decided to find him again. When he left the facility, he wasn't fixed, but he was different, quieter, more careful, more aware of the shadows he carried. He didn't try to rush back to fame. He didn't demand forgiveness. He simply went back to work, wrote songs that felt closer to his truth, collaborated with people who understood his heart, not just his image. One night, during a recording session, someone played back a track he had just finished. It was raw. It talked about pressure, about feeling misunderstood, about the fire in his chest that sometimes burned everything too quickly. He listened to it with his eyes closed, and when it ended, he whispered, "That's the closest I've come to saying it." He wasn't perfect, he never would be, but he was trying to stay present, trying to stay honest, trying to stay human in a world that often turns artists into statues. Later that year, he released Femme. The album included hits like Look at Me Now, She Ain't You, and Yeah, 3X. It won him a Grammy, but the award wasn't the part that mattered most. It was the process, the work, the slow return to himself. The understanding that healing isn't loud, it's quiet. Like a boy sitting in a dressing room, hands shaking, heart open, learning how to breathe again. The walls were gray, the floor was cold. The light flickered every few minutes, buzzing like a tired fly. It wasn't loud here not like the outside world. There were no cameras, no music, no fans, just silence, steel, and the steady ticking of time. Chris Brown sat on a thin mattress inside a jail cell. No posters, no windows, just a small square space and his own breath. This was 2014. He was 24 years old. He didn't cry when they closed the door behind him. He didn't scream. He just sat and began to count the days. At first, time moved slowly. Each morning started the same warily wake-ups roll call, the clank of trays sliding down the hallway. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. In here, words felt heavy, like they couldn't carry the weight of what he was feeling. So he focused on something he could control, push-ups. Every morning, Chris dropped to the floor and started 10, 20, 30. His arms burned, his chest tightened. Sweat dripped onto the concrete, but the pain helped. It gave shape to the silence, gave rhythm to the waiting. He did them again in the afternoon, then again at night. By the second week, he wasn't counting anymore. He just moved, up, down, breathe, push. Sometimes other inmates watched, a few even joined him. But mostly, it was just him and the floor. He wasn't trying to stay fit, he was trying to stay sane. He thought about a lot of things in that cell. His daughter Royalty, who had been born just months before. The way she had looked at him with her tiny eyes, like he was something good. He thought about his mother, her strength, her prayers, The way she had stood beside him through storms most people couldn't survive. He thought about the music, the songs he hadn't written yet, the lyrics still floating inside him. And he thought about his past, the fights, the mistakes, the moments he wanted to erase. They played like a movie in his mind, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Some nights, he couldn't sleep. The mattress was too thin, the noise outside the cell too sharp. But mostly, it was the thoughts. They didn't let him rest. He had been sent here after violating probation. His past was still following him like a shadow that didn't need sunlight to appear. Court dates, legal documents, broken trust. Even when he was trying to move forward, something always seemed to pull him back. And it was here in this place of steel and silence that he heard a word that would finally explain some of the storm inside. Him, bipolar. That was the first part of the diagnosis. Then came the second, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. He sat quietly as the prison psychologist explained it. His mood swings, his anger, the moments when he went from calm to chaos. They weren't just habits, they were symptoms. The result of years of holding things in, years of witnessing violence, of fearing it, of surviving it, of carrying it without knowing how to set it down. Chris didn't know how to respond. He just nodded. And later, when he returned to his cell, he sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes staring at nothing. He whispered the words to himself like a secret: bipolar, PTSD. They didn't scare him, they didn't shame him. In a strange way, they felt like answers, like someone had finally handed him the missing pages of his own story. And for the first time, he didn't feel crazy. He felt human, wounded, but not broken. In the weeks that followed, he leaned into healing. He read books the counselors gave him about emotions, about trauma, about self-regulation. He kept journaling, drawing, breathing through the discomfort. Some days were harder than others. There were setbacks, moments when the pressure inside him built too high. But he was learning how to pause, how to listen to the signals his body gave him, how to speak with more than his voice. He started writing lyrics again, soft ones on the back of napkins, inside the covers of books, on scraps of paper he folded and hid in his shoes. He wasn't writing for fame or fans or money. He was writing to remember, to feel, to stay connected to the parts of himself that still believed in light. He looked at the walls of his cell. No posters, no colors, but in his mind there were paintings, bright ones, shapes and faces and rhythms. He imagined himself in a studio again, headphones on, mic in front of him, singing not to impress but to breathe, because music wasn't a performance anymore, it was medicine. One afternoon, as he did push-ups on the floor, he heard the guard call his name. He had a visitor, his mother. When he saw her walk through the door, something inside him cracked open. She looked tired, but strong. As always, she hugged him tight. Didn't say much. She didn't need to. Still believed in the man he could become. He told her about the books, about the diagnosis, about the push-ups. She smiled through tears, told him to keep going, that this wasn't the end, that he was still her son, still someone worth loving. And when she left, he felt a little lighter, a little taller, a little more ready. He served 108 days in jail, not years, not decades, but it was enough to quiet the noise, enough to open a door inside him. And when the day came to walk out, he didn't rush. He stood still for a moment, looked back at the cell, and whispered, "Thank you." Not because he loved it, not because it was easy, but because it forced him to look inward, to face things he had been running from, to name the monsters by their real names: bipolar, PTSD, grief, shame, hope. And when he stepped back into the world, it wasn't into the spotlight. It was into himself, a little wiser, a little softer, still healing, but walking forward. And in the distance, waiting like a gentle echo, was the music. Still there, still patient, still calling. The first time Chris stepped back on stage after jail, the lights felt different. They were just as bright, just as warm on his skin, but something inside him had shifted. The roar of the crowd still came, the fans still cheered, but the sound didn't fill him the way it used to. It echoed, and inside that echo was something sharp. He was grateful to be there, grateful to sing again, to move, to perform. But the stage no longer felt like escape. It felt like truth, a place where every emotion came out whether he wanted it to or not. This was 2011. His album FAME had just been released. The letters stood for forgiving all my enemies. But to Chris, it also meant something else, facing all my emotions. He had poured so much of himself into that album, every beat, every lyric, every late-night recording session. The songs carried pieces of him, the joyful parts, the angry parts, the broken parts, the healing ones. When Look at Me Now dropped, it hit like thunder. People couldn't stop talking about it. The energy, the speed, the boldness. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a statement, a reminder that he was still here, still capable, still creating. But behind the scenes, Chris wasn't celebrating. He was thinking, reflecting, asking himself the same question over and over again. If they cheer now, do they really forgive me? Some days he believed they did. Other days, the silence in his hotel room said something else. He'd lie on the couch after a show, still dressed in stage clothes, sweat drying on his neck, and just stare at the ceiling. He remembered the nights in jail, the napkins with lyrics scribbled on them, the way he whispered rhymes to himself just to stay sane. Now, those whispers were blasting through speakers at sold-out shows. It was surreal, almost too much. He didn't feel like a star anymore. He felt like a man still trying to understand himself, still working through guilt, still carrying the weight of every headline, every angry tweet, every whispered judgment in the crowd. But the work helped. Recording helped. The stage helped. It gave him rhythm, structure, a place to put all the noise inside his chest. And Femi became more than an album, it became a mirror. The song Beautiful People was a reminder that worth wasn't about fame, it was about kindness, about connection. It played in clubs, in cars, on radios around the world. But Chris wrote it alone in a quiet studio, imagining a world where he was more than the worst thing he'd ever done. Touring was hard, physically, mentally, emotionally. He gave everything on stage, every spin, every note, every shout. People screamed his name, reached for his hand, held up signs with his face on them. And every night, after the last song faded and the crowd disappeared, Chris returned to silence. He would sit in the dressing room, still breathing hard, and listen to the emptiness around him. Sometimes he talked to himself. Did I do enough? Did I mean it? Do they see me? Or just the idea of me? One night during a show in Europe, something strange happened. In the middle of a performance, Chris caught a glimpse of himself on the giant screen behind the stage. He looked confident, cool, unshaken, but it didn't match how he felt inside. He kept dancing, kept singing, but the image stuck in his head. After the show, he went back to the hotel, took off his jacket, sat by the window, and started writing. The words came slowly, but they came. Applause can't heal the heart. Beats can't erase the past. But I still try. Every night, I try. He folded the paper, put it in his journal, and slept without music for the first time in weeks. Femi went on to win Best R&B Album at the Grammys. It was a big night. He walked the red carpet, smiled for the cameras, held the award in his hands. But when he got backstage, he didn't feel like shouting. He sat in a quiet corner, holding the golden gramophone in his lap. He traced the edges of it with his thumb. It felt heavy. He thought of the nights he spent pushing against the floor of a jail cell, just trying to feel something solid. He thought of royalty, his daughter, her soft breath, her tiny hands. He thought of his mom, who had prayed for him every single night, and he whispered one word, thanks, not to the world, not to the industry, but to the journey, to the push and pull of pain and growth, to the strange path that had brought him here. He didn't stay long at the after-party. He said goodnight early and walked outside. The air was cool. He breathed it in like medicine. A few fans spotted him, asked for pictures. He smiled, said yes, but in his heart, he was somewhere else, somewhere quiet. A place where music didn't have to be loud to matter. After Femi, Chris kept recording, kept performing. His fan base, Team Breezy, stood strong. They showed up, showed love, defended him when others didn't. And Chris noticed he read the messages, the long letters, the short comments that simply said, I see you. That meant something, because being seen truly, seen is different from being watched, and Chris didn't want to be famous for surviving. He wanted to be remembered for growing. So he kept going. One note at a time, one dance at a time, one breath at a time. Still haunted, still healing, but still here. Chris was used to loud things, roaring fans, screaming headlines, studio beats that shook the walls. But the moment he held his daughter for the first time, everything went quiet. Her skin was warm like sunshine, and her breath came out in tiny puffs. Her fingers curled around his thumb without knowing who he was. And yet, somehow, she already knew him. He looked at her and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Stillness. It was the kind of quiet you feel in your chest, not your ears. The kind that makes the world slow down. The kind that stays. She was so small in his arms. To breathe, to remember. He even launched a clothing line inspired by her. Tiny jackets and playful designs. It wasn't about money. It was about leaving something behind that carried her joy. Now he fell asleep listening to her little sighs. He started waking up early, not to catch a flight or fix a mix, but just to watch her wake up, about starting over, not as a star, but as a father. In interviews, he talked about her more than himself. Before stepping on stage, he'd kneel beside her, tie her shoes, give her a kiss on the forehead, and whisper, "I'll be right back." Her tiny arms stretched out like she had been reaching for him in her dreams. He stood there for a while, just watching. That night, he didn't play music or turn on the TV, her tiny hands gripping the gold statue, her face full of wonder. Akko, his son, then Lovely, his baby girl. Each one opened his heart a little more. He learned how to balance more bedtime stories, more birthdays, more moments that made his world bigger and softer all at once. And in the caption he wrote, "This is what matters most. Not the award, not the shine, but the look on her face, the innocence, the light." He just lay beside her and let the silence hold them both. He wasn't just showing love, he was showing healing, the kind who shows up, who listens, who holds space when it's needed, not on stage, not in front of fans, but in the quiet moments when a child asks a hard question, or when they cry and don't know why, or when they simply need to be held without answers, just arms. He wasn't raising his voice, he was raising his presence, a kind of quiet rebuilding that doesn't need to be shouted, and she'd nod like she believed it with her whole heart. Through who you raise, through how you treat them, through what you leave behind in their hearts, about how she was helping him grow up, not just into a better artist, but a better man. He would whisper good morning before she opened her eyes, and when she smiled, it felt like forgiveness. But it gave him a reason to write better ones. Stories with gentler endings, stories filled with hope. He named her Royalty, not because he saw himself as a king, not because of fame, saying no to things that once pulled him in too deep. His priorities shifted. He wasn't chasing attention, he was chasing presence, time with her, days without distractions, little things like walking in parks and coloring books and bedtime songs. But because she was precious, like something rare you don't find twice. When he looked into her eyes, he didn't feel judged, he felt seen, loved without condition. And slowly, that love began to change him from the inside. She wasn't just his child, she was his second chance. A soft reminder that life could start fresh even after the hardest mistakes. The world didn't know about her at first. For a while, it was just theirs. Private moments, quiet bottles in the middle of the night, baby songs sung in whispers. Chris learned how to warm formula, how to rock a cradle, how to stay awake even when his body begged for sleep. Her laughter filled the quiet corners of his life, the corners he used to avoid, the ones filled with regret she didn't see his flaws. She didn't care about his past, she just saw Daddy, and he didn't mind because she was his calm. He used to fall asleep thinking about shows, or sales, or what the world thought of him. As she grew, so did his heart. He found joy in routines, diaper changes, first steps, crayon drawing stuck to the fridge. Chris wasn't perfect. He still made mistakes, still had hard days. But Royalty gave him something that fame never could. He started painting more, canvases covered in color, scenes filled with softness. He painted her smile, her shoes, her favorite stuffed animal. He painted to feel. Music changed too. His lyrics softened. They held more light. He wrote songs about mornings and hope. He once said, "She's my peace," and he meant it. Tour life became different. He would bring her along when he could. Backstage turned into playrooms, dressing rooms filled with toys. One night, after a long show, Chris returned to his hotel room and found her sleeping in bed with his mom. Fatherhood didn't erase his past. It didn't remove the stories written before she arrived. He started taking care of his health more, resting, reflecting. When he posted about her, fans noticed the difference, the way his face lit up, the calm in his smile. He shared a picture of her holding his Grammy once. Later, Chris welcomed more children. He wasn't trying to be a perfect dad. He knew that wasn't real, but he was trying to be a present one. He said once, being a father teaches you how to be brave in new ways. Chris began to see legacy differently. Not as something built through fame, but through love. At night, he often looked at the moon. He liked how it always came back, how it didn't need to be full to shine. That's what fatherhood felt like to him. Not perfect. Not always clear, but steady, bright in its own way, present even in the dark. The lights above him were bright and hot. The music behind him was loud. The crowd in front of him was screaming his name. Chris moved with sharp energy, spinning, singing, dancing. He gave everything he had, just like he always did. But deep inside, something felt wrong. His chest was tight, his arms felt heavy. His legs didn't move like they used to. He had been on tour for weeks, moving from city to city, sleeping on buses, living in airports, waking up to flashing cameras, going to bed long after midnight. The days all blended together. The excitement was real, but so was the pressure. Chris kept performing, kept smiling, even when his body begged him to stop. That night, just before his third song, something inside him shifted. His vision blurred. His breath got short. The stage lights began to feel too bright. The sound around him seemed far away. Then, in front of thousands of people, Chris dropped to his knees and collapsed. He didn't fall gently. His body hit the floor with weight and silence. At first, the audience thought it was part of the show, a dramatic moment, a planned fall. But as the music cut off and his dancers froze, it became clear something was wrong. Crew members rushed toward him. A medic called his name, but Chris didn't respond. He was on the floor, still quiet, unable to speak. They carried him off stage. His head was heavy. His skin was cold. He was taken to a hospital where machines beeped gently beside him. For hours he lay in a hospital bed, drifting between sleep and silence. When he finally opened his eyes, the room was still. A soft light glowed on the wall. His body felt empty. A nurse came in and told him what had happened. It was a non-epileptic seizure, she said. It wasn't a disease. It was his body's way of saying it couldn't take the stress anymore. Chris didn't say much. He looked at the ceiling and felt a deep sadness grow inside him. He had ignored the signs. He had pushed too hard. Later that day, his mother came to visit. She walked into the room and sat by his bed. She didn't say anything right away. She just held his hand. Her eyes were tired, but full of love. She gently brushed hair from his forehead. Chris looked at her and felt safe, like he was a boy again. A boy, not a brand. For the next few days, he rested. He didn't check his phone. He didn't take calls. He stayed in bed, listening to the quiet around him. His mind played old memories like a slow movie. He saw hotel rooms, long rehearsals, flights he barely remembered. And behind it all, a question kept coming back. Why didn't I stop sooner? The doctor told him to take a break, a real one, not just a few days off, not just sleep. He needed time away from noise, lights, and pressure. Chris agreed. He canceled shows. He told his team he needed to pause, not because he was weak, but because something inside him had broken and it needed healing. At home, he moved slowly. He sat in the sunlight. He walked barefoot through his backyard. He sat on the couch without music playing. He drank tea. He let himself feel the quiet. It wasn't easy. Stillness felt strange at first, but over time, it started to feel like safety. He began seeing a therapist again, someone he trusted, someone who listened without judgment. Chris talked about fear, about guilt, about how he always felt like he had to prove something, that if he stopped moving, people would forget him, that if he wasn't on stage, he didn't know who he was. They spoke about pressure, how it can build slowly, like water behind a wall, until one day it cracks. And that's what happened to him. His seizure wasn't random. It was his body's last cry for help. It had been asking quietly for years. Now, it had shouted. He also started writing again. Not songs for release, just simple thoughts in a notebook. Today, I feel tired. I miss dancing. I want to be okay. He didn't try to rhyme. He didn't try to be deep. He just wrote what was real. Some pages were filled with only one word. One afternoon, he returned to a dance studio. It was empty. No mirrors, no loud music, just him and the wooden floor. He took off his shoes, closed his eyes, and let his body move, not to impress, not to perform, just to stretch, to sway, to feel. It was the first time dancing felt gentle. He also picked up his paintbrushes again, the same ones he had left on a shelf months ago. He dipped them in soft blues, slow reds, golden yellows. He painted faces with closed eyes, bodies curled in rest, words like pause and listen hidden in the backgrounds. His art wasn't loud, but it spoke to him. And he spent more time with his children. He read bedtime stories, helped with homework, cooked simple meals. One night, Royalty sat next to him and drew a picture. "This is you resting, Daddy," she said, showing him a stick figure under a blanket with a big smile. He laughed gently. Then he cried. Chris realized something important. His worth didn't come from how much he worked, or how hard he danced, or how many people screamed his name. His worth was already there, inside him, even when he was quiet, even when he was still. The blackout had scared him, but it had also saved him. It forced him to slow down, to look inward, to ask new questions, to learn new answers. It was not a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. He wrote a quiet song during this time, just a guitar and his voice. No fast beat, no background dancers, just honesty, the lyrics said. Even bright lights need to dim. Even stars need sleep. He recorded it in one take, late at night, with only a single lamp glowing in the studio. He didn't release the song right away. It wasn't meant for charts, it was meant for healing. It was a letter to himself, a reminder that he didn't have to keep burning just to be seen. He could shine in softer ways. Now when he steps back on stage, he breathes first. He checks in with himself. He reminds his heart that it matters. He tells his body, "Thank you." He knows now that pushing too far doesn't make you strong. Resting when you need to, that's real strength. And the next time his body whispers, he will listen. He won't wait for a shout, because the stage will always be there. But peace only stays when we make room for it. In the next part, Chris turns to painting, not to impress, but to heal. Alone in his studio, he paints faces, dreams, and moments too deep for music. What do his colors reveal that his songs could not? And how did art become the quiet space where he finally found balance? The room was quiet, not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that feels safe. A soft light came through the window. The smell of paint filled the air. In the center of the room stood Chris, holding a brush in one hand and a small canvas in the other. He wasn't here to perform. He was here to feel. This was his art studio. No stage, no microphones, no audience, just walls covered in color and shelves filled with paint bottles. There were canvases stacked against every corner, some finished, some half done, some just waiting, and every single one carried a piece of him. A story, a memory, a breath he couldn't take anywhere else. Chris had always loved art. Even as a kid, he liked drawing in the margins of his notebooks. He drew faces, he drew dreams, he made shapes out of silence. But when music took over his life, painting had to wait. Until now, until life reminded him that quiet things can heal us too. He dipped his brush in blue. Not the bright blue of skies or oceans, but the deep blue of thoughts. He dragged the brush slowly across the canvas. One stroke, then another. He didn't have a plan. He let the colors speak. Let them move. Let them tell the truth without words. Some days, he painted faces. Not perfect ones. Faces with eyes that looked away, with lips that didn't smile. Faces that felt like memories, like feelings he couldn't name. Other times, he painted shadows. Soft ones, the kind that follow you but never hurt you. He called those paintings gentle ghosts. He also painted his children. Their small hands, their wild hair, their joy. He painted them like sunlight, bright, soft, and always reaching. He kept those paintings in the safest corner of his studio. They reminded him of why he kept going, of what really mattered in his life. Chris never planned to share the paintings. They weren't made for galleries or shows. They were made for healing, for breathing, for understanding himself. Each brushstroke was like a step, away from pressure, away from pain, toward peace. One day he painted a large canvas with bold colors, red, gold, and black. In the middle was a crown, not a perfect one, a cracked one, with light coming out of the cracks. He called the painting Broken King. When someone asked him what it meant, he said, "It's how I feel." He didn't try to explain every piece, he just let people feel them. Some fans who saw his work said it helped them cry. Others said it helped them smile. That meant more to Chris than any chart or trophy. Because art, like music, wasn't about fame, it was about connection. He started painting at night when the house was still. After his kids were asleep, after the world had stopped asking for his attention, he would stand at the easel in a hoodie and sweats, no shoes, no distractions. Just the soft sound of a brush moving through paint. It became a ritual, a way to check in with himself. How am I feeling today? What color matches my heart? What shape does sadness make? What does joy look like when no one is watching? Some nights the paintings came fast, like they had been waiting inside him. Other nights he just stood there, staring at the blank canvas, letting silence be enough. He learned that not every moment had to be filled, that stillness was part of the process. Painting helped him understand things that music couldn't touch. There were parts of his story that didn't fit into lyrics, that couldn't be sung, that needed to be seen instead, layer by layer, stroke by stroke. No auto-tune, no edits, just raw color. It also gave him control. On stage, so much was decided for him: what to wear, what to say, how to move. But in the studio, with a brush in his hand, Chris decided everything. He could paint over a mistake, start again, create a new ending. It reminded him that life, too, could be rewritten. In one corner of the room, he kept a series of paintings no one else had seen. He called them the quiet ones. Each canvas held a small moment, a pair of hands reaching out, a tear falling into water, a single eye half closed. They were private, personal, like journal entries in color. When asked in an interview why he paints, Chris answered softly, "Because it lets me speak without explaining. It lets me show people what's behind the songs." Then he smiled, looked away, and added, "Some feelings don't need to be fixed. They just need to be seen." Art also helped him deal with the hard days, the ones where the past felt heavy, the ones where judgment felt louder than love. When words failed him, colors did not. He'd reach for a brush, let his hand lead the way, and find peace again in the act of creating. One of his most emotional pieces was a painting of a young boy sitting on a staircase. The boy's head was down, his hands were on his knees. Behind him, a shadow stretched long but didn't touch him. Chris titled it "Before the Music." It reminded him of who he was before the spotlight, before the noise. He painted Michael Jackson once too, not the famous version, but a quiet one-eyes closed hand on heart, standing in front of a child. That painting meant a lot to him. It was his way of saying thank you, of honoring someone who had shaped his dreams. Over time, people began to notice his art. It wasn't flashy, it didn't scream, it whispered, and that whisper spoke to people. He began sharing pieces online, selling a few for charity, donating others to schools and youth centers. He wanted his healing to help others find theirs. Painting didn't replace music, it added to it, like another verse in his life's song. A quieter one, a softer one, but just as true. It reminded him that creativity wasn't about perfection, it was about expression. About letting what's inside have room to breathe, to exist, to be accepted even when it's messy. And through that messy beauty, Chris found balance. He would still perform, still record, still share his story. But now, when the noise became too much, he had a place to go. A room filled with color, a quiet canvas, a paint-stained floor, a place where healing didn't have to be loud. In the next part, we follow Chris overseas, where an arrest in London brings back old fears. As headlines spin and legal battles rise again, can the quiet he's found survive the storm waiting in the fog? The rain tapped softly against the hotel window. Outside, the city of London stretched in gray silence. Inside, Chris sat alone, watching water slide down the glass. His suitcase sat near the door, half-sipped. His phone was turned off. The room smelled like cold coffee and quiet stress. And in his chest, a slow ache was growing. It had been a long tour, flights, interviews, flashing lights, each city blurred into the next. But London was different. It felt heavier, colder, like something was waiting. Chris tried to rest, tried to focus on the shows, but there was tension in the airtight and hard to name. Then came the knock. Soft at first, then firmer. When Chris opened the door, he was met by officers. Their faces were serious, their words clear. He was under arrest. Again, in that moment, the air seemed to freeze. The headlines hadn't even been written yet, but Chris already knew what they would say. He didn't argue, he didn't cry. He just stood still, arms at his sides, as the cuffs clicked behind him. The station was cold, bright, too quiet. He sat on a bench, alone, his mind racing through every past mistake, every courtroom, every rumor, every time he thought it was behind him. And now, here it was again. Another allegation, another storm, another mountain to climb while the world watched. Later, his team explained the situation. A nightclub, an accusation, a lawsuit waiting. His heart sank deeper. Not just because of fear, but because of exhaustion. He was tired. Tired of being in rooms like this. Tired of living under a spotlight that burned instead of warmed. Chris didn't speak much. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly, not from guilt, but from the weight of always being misunderstood. He had spent years rebuilding, learning, healing, and still trouble found him. Or maybe it never really left. When he was finally released on bail, the number hit hard $6.7 million. That amount didn't just feel like money, it felt like chains, like proof that peace came with a price. He walked out of the station into the fog. Cameras waited, questions flew, but Chris didn't answer. Back at the hotel, he pulled the curtain shut and sat by the window again. Same chair, same rain, but now the silence was louder. He picked up his journal and opened to a blank page. His hands were still shaking, but he wrote anyway. "I'm trying. I really am." He sat for a long time after that. No music, no phone, just his thoughts. He thought about his kids, about their smiles, about how much he didn't want them to grow up reading stories like this. He thought about his mom, about her strength, about how often she had prayed for him. He knew the truth would take time to come out. It always did. But in the waiting, in the in-between, the world would write its own version. People would point. They always did. Some would believe him, others never would. That's how it had been since the beginning. He had learned how to survive the noise. But surviving wasn't the same as living. So Chris made a choice, to stay soft even when the world turned hard. He got back on the tour bus and sat by the window. London's streets blurred past, covered in fog. He played a beat softly in his headphones. Something slow, something new. The kind of sound that wrapped around pain without trying to fix it. That night, on stage, he moved slower. Not from fear, but from reflection. He let his voice carry the weight of the week. Let the music hold the words he didn't want to speak out loud. The crowd didn't know every detail, but they felt something in his voice. Something raw, something real. Later, backstage, he picked up his sketch pad, drew a window with raindrops, a man sitting beside it, a crown on the floor, a child's drawing on the wall. Underneath, he wrote one word, balance, because that's what he was searching for now. Not perfection, not approval, just balance. A life where he could be a father, an artist, a man with a past and a future. A life where mistakes didn't cancel growth, where healing was allowed to be messy, where truth didn't have to shout. Back in the US, the legal battle began. Lawyers, papers, interviews. Another $500 million defamation suit. More headlines, more noise. But this time, Chris didn't fall apart. He kept painting, he kept journaling, he kept talking to his kids. He focused on the small things, things that made him feel human. He didn't stop the storm, but he learned how to build shelter inside it. He started meditating each morning, just 10 minutes of breathing, of silence, of reminding himself that peace was still possible, that he didn't need to fight every rumor, that his life was bigger than any headline. One morning, royalty asked him, "Are you okay, Daddy?" He smiled softly. "I'm okay today," he said, "and that's enough." He hugged her tight, not because he was strong, but because he was present. Chris began writing songs again, not ones meant for the radio, but ones meant for healing. He filled a notebook with lyrics that whispered instead of screamed. One chorus simply said, "I can't erase the rain, but I can dance in it." He kept the song to himself. Maybe one day he'd share it, maybe not. Some songs were for the world. Some were for his heart. That was something he was learning. Everything didn't need to be public. Some healing could stay private. As the court dates continued, Chris remained calm. He let his team speak. He stayed close to his family. And when nights felt heavy, he didn't paint strength. He painted softness. He painted broken glass with flowers growing through it. He painted hands holding light. He painted hope, not loud, not flashy, just quiet, steady hope. Because he knew now it wasn't about never falling. It was about rising gently again. In the next part, Chris writes directly to the world. No filters, no stage, just truth. What does he say when he stops singing and starts speaking from the heart? And how does a simple letter become the softest chapter in his story? The room was still. A small desk sat by the window. The wind outside moved slowly through the trees. A warm light glowed from a nearby lamp, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. Chris sat alone in a quiet chair. He had his phone turned off, his laptop closed, just a pen and a plain sheet of paper in front of him. The room didn't need sound. The silence felt right. He had written a lot over the years. Song lyrics, journal entries, poems on hotel notepads, short prayers on scraps of paper. But this felt different. This wasn't for a song or a stage. This wasn't meant to be sold. He was writing something that felt more honest. A letter to no one and everyone at the same time. A letter to those who had followed him, judged him, forgiven him, or simply watched from afar. For a long time, he didn't write anything. He just sat and stared at the page. There was so much he wanted to say, and yet, it all felt too big to fit into words. Then finally, with a deep breath, he began to write. Slowly, softly. I don't always know how to explain myself, he wrote, but I've been trying. He paused after the first sentence. His hand shook a little, not from fear, but from weight, the kind that builds over time. Then he kept going. He wrote about his childhood, about growing up in a house that didn't always feel safe, about hiding under blankets to escape the yelling in the next room. He remembered holding his breath while the walls shook. He remembered turning on music to drown out the noise. Michael Jackson's voice became his first comfort. He wrote about how performing became a way to feel seen, how dancing made his body feel free, how singing helped him release what he couldn't say. He remembered the first time someone clapped for him. It felt like being wrapped in light, like someone finally understood him. He also wrote about fame, how fast it came, how strong it pulled. He had only wanted to be loved. But the world didn't just give love, it gave pressure, it gave attention, it gave judgment. It gave him everything, but also asked for more than he knew how to give. Chris admitted that he made mistakes. Big ones, painful ones, ones that hurt people he cared about. He didn't try to cover them up. He didn't make excuses. He wrote, I've done things I regret. I've been lost. I've been angry. I've been broken. And I've hurt others while trying to find myself. He paused again, put the pen down for a moment, rubbed his eyes, then kept going. He wrote about learning, about therapy, about sitting across from someone who asked hard questions and waited for real answers. He wrote about facing memories he didn't want to remember, feelings he had tried to bury under music and movement. He shared what it felt like to start over, to tell the truth even when it was messy, even when it meant saying, I don't know who I am right now. He wrote about quiet mornings where he made tea and watched the sunrise, about late nights painting in silence, about holding his children and feeling a kind of love he never knew existed. He wrote about fatherhood, how it changed him, how each child showed him a different part of his heart. Royalty's joy echoes calm, lovely's gentleness, he said. When I look at them, I don't see what I've done wrong. I see what I still have the chance to do right. Chris described the pressure of being seen as a role model, the fear of failing in public, the weight of always being asked to explain or defend. He wrote, I'm not here to be perfect. I'm here to be real, to grow, to show that it's possible to rise again after falling. He wrote about fans too, the ones who stayed, the ones who walked away, the ones who prayed for him. He said, some of you saw more in me than I saw in myself. Thank you for that. Your faith helped me when mine was gone. He wrote about silence, how hard it is to sit with it, but how important it has become. He said, in the quiet, I've met the parts of me that music couldn't reach. He talked about art as a soft medicine, the way brushes and colors gave his hands something to hold when everything else felt heavy. He talked about shame, about standing on stage and wondering if people clapped for the music or just the mask. He admitted he used to be scared of not being enough, of being forgotten, of being judged only by the worst parts of his story. But now, he was learning that healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about carrying it with care. He described his dreams for the future. They weren't about fame or records, they were about peace. About being able to sit on his porch with his children and feel proud of the person he had become. He wanted to cook more meals, laugh more, travel less for work, and more for joy. Chris finished the letter with simple words. I'm still learning, still growing, still becoming the man I want to be. And even if the world never sees it, I'll keep doing the work because I finally believe I'm worth the work." He signed it without a name. Then, like he did when he was a boy, he doodled a crown in the corner. It wasn't fancy, just a small sketch. Slightly tilted, a little cracked, but it was his. He folded the letter and placed it in a box, not to hide it, but to honor it. A letter doesn't need to be sent to matter. Sometimes writing it is enough. Later that week, Chris shared a few quiet thoughts with fans. Not in a song, not on a stage, just a soft video message. He wore a plain hoodie, sat in his home. His voice was steady, calm. "I'm not trying to be who I was," he said. "I'm just trying to be honest with myself, with you, with life." He didn't apologize again. He didn't explain every detail. He just offered something true. "I hope you find your peace too," he said, looking into the camera, "because we all deserve that." Then he ended the video with a small smile. Not the stage smile, the real one. Later that night, he sat by the window. Same desk, same wind, same pen. But this time, he didn't need to write anything. He just breathed, and it was enough. In the final part, the crowd is gone. The lights are low, and Chris walks across an empty stage with no one watching. What does the last song sound like when it's just for him and? What peace is waiting at the end of his long journey? The crowd had gone. The cheers were gone. The music had stopped. The seats were empty, and the lights above the stage were no longer shining. But the stage still stood quietly, waiting. It was quiet in a different way now. Not sad, not loud, just peaceful. The kind of quiet that wraps around you like a blanket at the end of a long day. Chris walked back into the empty arena. No one else was there, no sound, just his footsteps moving across the floor. The stage, which had held so much sound just hours ago, was now covered in soft shadows. Bits of confetti rested near the speakers. A water bottle lay tipped on its side. Everything felt still, as if the room itself was taking a breath. He wasn't wearing a flashy outfit, just a hoodie, some old sweatpants, and sneakers. He had taken off the performer's mask. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to feel, to remember, to say goodbye not forever, but to a version of himself that had carried a lot of weight. He walked up the steps slowly and stood at the center of the stage. From there, he could see every row of seats. He could picture the fans, the smiles, the hands reaching out, the eyes filled with excitement. Now those same seats were just chairs again, still and quiet, but the energy lingered, soft like a dream. Chris sat down near the edge of the stage. He let his legs dangle. He looked out and took a deep breath. He didn't rush to do anything. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just sat in the quiet. It felt like something sacred, a gentle ending, a moment meant only for him. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket. It was bent at the corners, filled with scribbles, thoughts, pieces of lyrics. He flipped to a blank page and started to write. The pen moved slowly. The words weren't planned, they just came. "I don't need the noise to feel alive anymore." He looked up and let that thought settle in his chest. He smiled softly. It wasn't the big smile he gave during shows. It was the kind of smile that came from deep inside, a smile that said, "I'm okay. Not perfect, but okay." He stood again and walked toward the microphone stand. The mic wasn't on, no one was listening, but he stood in front of it anyway. He closed his eyes and sang one last song, not with full power, not to hit every note, but to feel the words. The song was slow, something new, something honest, a song about peace, about falling down and getting up, about learning how to rest. The words filled the room like a whisper. He sang just loud enough to hear himself. He wasn't trying to prove anything. Not anymore. After everything, after the fame, the mistakes, the comebacks, the quiet nights alone, this was the most honest moment of all. He walked around the stage slowly, letting his hand run along the railings, touching the speakers, the floor, the lights. Everything had been part of his journey. Every part had meant something, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. He sat down again and closed his eyes. He thought about where he started. A boy in Virginia, dancing in gas station parking lots. A boy who listened to music to hide from the pain. A boy who believed in something bigger, even when life felt small. And now here he was, not a boy anymore, not a perfect man either, but someone still here, still breathing, still healing, still learning to love who he was becoming. He opened his eyes and looked out into the dark rows of seats. He imagined his children sitting there, watching quietly, smiling at him, not because he was famous, but because he was Dad. He imagined them clapping not loudly, but gently, the kind of applause that means you did good. He reached into his bag and pulled out a paintbrush. It was something he always carried now, not to paint in that moment, but as a reminder that there are many ways to tell a story, that sometimes silence speaks louder than songs. He looked at the brush, held it for a while, then tucked it away again. He whispered to himself, "Thank you," to the stage, to the silence, to the journey, to the people who had left, to the ones who had stayed, to every lesson, even the ones that hurt. He stood one last time, walked to the center of the stage, and bowed slow and deep, not for applause, but for closure. Because sometimes a bow is not about performance, it's about peace. He turned and walked off the stage. No cameras followed, no music played, just the sound of his own steps and the soft beat of his heart. Outside the arena, the night air was cool, the moon was full. The stars blinked quietly above. He stood for a moment and looked up. They didn't know his name, but they still shined for him. He breathed in slowly, then started walking. Not toward a concert, not toward a headline, just home. To the place where lights are off and love is simple. To the place where his kids are sleeping. To the place where peace doesn't need an audience, it just needs space. He passed a street lamp and caught his reflection in a dark window. He looked older, softer, stronger, in a different way. He nodded once to himself and kept walking. With no rush, no fear, just steady steps. Because the stage will always remember the sound of his voice. But now, Chris had learned to listen to the sound of his own silence. And that silence wasn't empty. It was full of truth, of growth, of second chances. And above all of rest. As the lights go down and the stage grows quiet, maybe you're feeling something too. Maybe you've been carrying weight like Chris did, trying hard, falling down, getting back up, searching for peace in a world that wants you to be loud. But tonight, you don't have to be loud. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to be anyone else. You're already enough, just as you are. Like Chris, your story doesn't end with applause. It ends in stillness, in breath, in the quiet knowing that being here, being alive, is more than enough. So tonight, let yourself rest. You've walked far, you've tried hard. Now, it's time to be soft, to breathe, to sleep, and to trust that your journey, just like his is, still unfolding in beautiful ways.